before we get started properly on my talk, John and Anne and various helpers are handing out plastic bags with 2 sweets in. So some of you may have started already, and I'm just going to say stop. This is this is a good challenge for delayed gratification. And if nobody's seen the experiments on that with young children and has known young children, then you'll know it's a good thing to do. So if you can just hold on to your bag, do not eat the sweets. There will be, in the middle of the talk, it's going to be a really good opportunity to use them, and I'll tell you then. Just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I've put in brackets that I'm an optometrist. There's a couple of you here who know that I don't very often admit to it. I work mainly in the voluntary sector and have for the vast majority of my career. I managed 5 years in the NHS and actually worked with the famed Tony Sabell at the Eye Hospital here in Birmingham. In that old building, I never moved to the new one. I still do 1 day a week in low vision practically, and that opportunity to meet with patients on a weekly basis is really important for my national role. And my national role is with Vision UK. Many of you may not know who Vision UK are. We are the umbrella organisation for the whole of the eye health sector. So we bring together a community of voluntary organisations, professional bodies, everything and anything to do with eyesight. You're a member of us, so there's a conduit by which we can make a change. And so some of the national questions that have come up this morning about policy, about how we affect things, about how we make choices on health provision, are things that we're addressing on a strategic level. So if there are things that you feel need to be fed up through national bodies, then we've certainly had a lot of experience of working with yourselves on that, and I'm very happy to be a voice on that. So a couple of other sort of practical points I've got, as Wahida did, I'm going to show you a few pieces of equipment. I've stolen the photographs from the companies that I borrowed them from, but I don't have any financial interest in anything. I've been very lucky to just work in the NHS and the voluntary sector, and I intend just to keep it that way. And just to say about my title. So unlike Wahida, I was awkward. I decided to change my title. I can't remember what John had it to begin with. But then when I came back to look at it, I sort of kicked myself, really, because I've spent the whole of my career actually saying to people, it's not just about the eyesight, it's about the person. So when I started to put my slides together, I thought, right, I want to start off focusing on the fact that it's not just the eyesight, it's the person. So I Googled the word better, because I thought, oh, that's a good start. I'll see if I can come up with a picture of better. And then, blow me, what comes up? The Monocle Guide to Better Living, which I thought was really, really good for keratoconus. If it's an audience that needs to know about a monocular view, it's probably the keratoconic audience. But I just couldn't get away from better and eyesight. And interestingly, on the Amazon site, when you go and see what the Monocular Guide to Better Living is all about, the pages that they show don't show the bits I'm going to show you. They actually show some Scandinavian people learning how to swim or jumping into a pool. So I didn't think I'd show you that. But it just shows you when you try and move away from things that you think are going to help you, that you don't always get the help you want. So what am I going to talk about as regards better? How am I going to address better eyesight today? So I'm going to begin really talking to you about what low vision services are, or what they should be, and really about how I think they're important for everybody in this room to be aware of. I'm then going to describe a little bit about the practical side of low vision, how we assess eyesight, how that helps, and what we can do in terms of magnification. I'd love to talk for hours, but as Wahida's probably heard through the grapevine, the clinics in low vision at Good Hope always overrun. I always confess to patients I always talk too much. So I have kept it to a few minimal things just to get you excited about what you can ask for and what you can do. And that's really what I'd like you to think about in the last part of my rounding up of the talk, is to think about if this is right for you and you haven't been offered it or you've not had access to low vision, how organisations represented here could help you access low vision, but how we can help advocate for change, how we can get people to understand that low vision may be a big part of keratoconus. So it's always a good idea to start with a definition. I'm very proud of this definition. It comes from a consensus document, but unfortunately the consensus document's quite old now, so we're going back 18 years. This is the work that moved me from a local role in a voluntary society for vision impaired people to a national job. I started a national job trying to get more low vision services based on this report. And the way they defined low vision was not by talking about magnifiers, was not by talking about having set criteria, being registered, or various things like that. It was about the fact that it was a range of services which help make use of eyesight to achieve maximum potential, to do the things that you want to be able to do. But they did have a caveat to that, because they actually said this is not a technical process. So it's not a black box. It's not about putting somebody in with 660 or a certain level of vision at the beginning and coming out with 6.5 or very small vision at the end. It's about understanding the whole person, and that's really, really important. And in understanding that whole person, we have to think about a person that would benefit from this. So the definition in that report is about somebody who can't be corrected with contact lenses or spectacles or medical intervention, and it causes restriction in that person's everyday life. So as your chairman mentioned, it may be that for a part of your life you can be corrected, but to have to watch television through a pinhole for leisure time, that must mean that something is going wrong. You should be able to ask for some help, or there should be some other solutions to that. So that would be a person with low vision. You'd fit into the category what was thought to be a consensus of the sort of people that would benefit from low vision services. And it's very clear in the report. The definition includes, but is not limited to, those registered as blind and partially sighted. So I think Rosemary this morning said she'd had real trouble getting certified and then registered as partially sighted. And she was denied services because she wasn't certified and registered. And if you go back to the actual legislation, the Care Act is very clear. You don't need to be certified and registered to get assistance. And certainly in my experience in low vision services, around half of the people we see are not certifiable. It's not that somebody's forgotten or overlooked the fact that they're certified. It's that if you look at the guidance for ophthalmologists, they wouldn't meet that criteria. But they are restricted in that in their everyday life by their vision, and so need some low vision assistance. And those statistics, just because it's easy for me to say in my clinic without backing that up, I think the Welsh analysis of the Welsh low vision service in the community, where community optometrists largely look after people, about half of those people are not certifiable. So it's clear that we've got a whole population of people that need some help. And you know better. All of you sitting here know that there are pressures of not wearing your lenses, actually wearing your lenses and not being fully corrected, put on your lifestyle, your emotional well-being, your relationships. John and I discussed this phrase, and this is a phrase I can clearly remember. I was talking to a local group, and the daughter said to her mother, "It would be nice if one day you could put in your lenses for me rather than work." And that's carries so much emotional weight. It's so important for me that we address that issue, and that if the person needs some assistance when she can't wear her lenses, in order to engage with her daughter and do the things she wants to do, we need to be able to address that, and hopefully low vision services can go towards that. But what are the barriers? What's the reality? Why doesn't it happen? I think one of the problems is everybody talks about this mythical state of point of diagnosis, but often it's a continuum. People may have gone to the opticians and started to wear contact lenses, be not quite clear what their diagnosis was, go along the pathways, and nobody actually says, actually, you've got low vision, you have got a vision impairment, and so that can make things difficult. I think as clinicians, we can often think we know right. We can actually think, be quite sort of patriarchal about things, want to sort of be in charge and do things. And sometimes we can say, well, you're corrected with lenses, we've got patients who can't see, who've got this and this eye condition, why are you upset? So clinicians can make the wrong decision. Clinicians can make decisions based on things that they perceive as being normal. If they perceive somebody's got 6/9 vision, they might not understand that there are difficulties with 6/9 vision. There may still be problems with contrast, with glare, with all the things that Wahida talked about this morning. Or you can manage 7 hours wear. Have you actually considered what 7 hours wear means? What about the other 5, 6, 7, 8 hours wear? What does that mean to my lifestyle? Or worse, as Rosemary said, you're not eligible because you've not been certified. Nobody's actually registered as partially sighted, so you can't be partially sighted, can you? So I think there are really strong barriers, and barriers that I hope as people with keratoconus you can help me fight against, because I think it's really important that we address those issues. So if we're beginning to address those issues and we're moving away from this idea it's just about eyesight, when I start seeing people in clinic, I'm always focused at the beginning on what that means for that person in terms of lifestyle and tasks. So we're trying to unpick a little bit about that person and what they do. It's a sort of sit down and tell me, what's your life about? So it's nice for me, and like the ophthalmologist, I get all the nice nosy bits. I can find out about people, find out what they do, where they work, what do they read, what practical tasks are they having difficulty with. I can get out of my comfort zone culturally. I work in Birmingham, so it's not just about somebody being able to read the newspaper. It might be that they're having difficulty sorting lentils and finding out the stones in the lentils that are difficult to see. So we have to think holistically about the person, have to ask them how people are getting around. Are they missing road crossings? Are there worries about crossing a road? How do people relax? Can you see the TV? Can you do crosswords? I've had a recent consultation where the gentleman really enjoys Speedway, and I hadn't realised how complicated the scoring system is. There's a very complex scoring system where you have to see what you're reading on a card. So they're all important things to address from a holistic point of view. And then really we have to start the assessment thinking about how can we get the best out of the vision that we've got at the moment. So how can I make the best of a visual system as it is? So we have to assess what somebody can see with and without their lenses and think about them in that context. What jobs do you want to do without your lenses? What jobs can you do with your lenses? So where and when are the lenses used? And sometimes it's important to really do everything you can to get the best correction. And sometimes that may be taking time out to actually modify a spectacle correction. So sometimes we have to play around with the lenses to get something that's more suitable, might be more suitable for a particular task, but we need to spend some time doing that. We have to measure vision, so we've actually understanding of vision. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. And we have to think about reading vision. How does somebody manage at close work as well, close to? So when I went to look on the Keratoconus site about assessing vision and sort of wanted to see what people's feedback had been about that. It's quite interesting to see how people's perception of having their vision measured can be quite negative. So something that's quite day-to-day for us, there was a lot of feedback saying, you know, this isn't right. When I go to have my eyes tested, it's always in ideal circumstances. The letters are spaced differently to things that I'm reading. It's very repetitive, so I know the letters. You know, how can this be a good assessment of what I can see? And I can see that can be quite worrying for yourselves if you're feeling that this isn't just a representation of what you can see, or you feel you're being let down in us saying, oh well, you've got 6/9 vision, you've got good vision, you can see well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we test it and how we measure and what we do really. And for those of you who are scientists or interested in all this sort of thing, you've probably heard all this before, but when we measure on the letter chart, we're measuring something which is called visual acuity. And it is an accuracy test. It's a limit of what we can just see. So there's a comparison in sort of things that we can just feel. And I know there's a party trick when you can move 2 pins away on the limit of the tip of your finger, and it tells you what your degree of sensation is. And I believe on your back you can actually spread your fingers quite a long way before you can feel 2 fingers. So don't all start fiddling with your backs now to work that out. I was doing it at home, and my husband was trying to work out what I was doing in the office. But basically, we're doing that with vision. We're trying to work out the gap of what we can just see. So when we have a letter chart, all the letters are a certain angle. And if you've heard the term 6/60 or 6/24 or 6/12 or so on, they're all based on Snellen, who worked this out in the 1800s. And then it was literally the distance that letter was held at to make that angle. So basically, if you ran back 2 swimming baths away and held the letter at 60 metres, then that person would be looking at that same letter at 60 metres, and that would make that angle. And then if we hold that letter at 6 metres, then it's obviously going to be a big letter because you'd have just been able to see it 60 metres away. So it's a little bit confusing, all this 6/16 and so on business. And we moved away from that in low vision and in contact lenses because we realised that there were some problems with it. So we tend to use logarithmic charts because in the logarithmic charts, the letters get smaller by a set amount each time. So there's a relationship between the letters, which is a very definite progressive relationship. And it means that I can work out magnification a lot easier because I know that a separation of 4 lines means that that letter is half the size of another letter. And it's also a lot nicer because you're not guessing one big letter at the top. So it makes it a lot more amenable and a lot more comfortable to measure vision properly. But one of the things that obviously came across in the feedback on the website was, well, you know, why do you have to always press me to read the sort of smallest line, or why are we having to read it to be pushed to the limit? Because that doesn't show what I can actually read when I'm out in the supermarket, or it doesn't show what I can actually do on a day-to-day basis. And the reason we always have to push you to the last line is that we're testing to threshold. What we want to know is, when you last came to clinic, has your vision gone down? And if it has gone down, what do we need to do about it? So that's why we push you to that same threshold. It's not realistic in what you can actually do day to day. And we know that as well from some research. So this is my Bairstow versus Bolt, so that you understand the difference between what I would say is jogging and sprinting. So the sprint is when we measure you in clinic. That's your absolute smallest detail, can't read anymore, that's the sprint, so that's the Bolt. The Bairstow is slower and more survival. That would be, if you watched me running, you would see it's a definite survival. And that's the sort of, you've got to be able to do it constantly. So what we know is that if we're pushed to the absolute limit, we can get away with a 1-to-1 reserve. So if I was to give you a certain size print to read a packet just to know what was in that packet, you could probably read it just at your threshold, but you wouldn't be able to read it for long. But if you were to read a paragraph or anything longer, you'd need to have things at least 3 times bigger. So you'd need that reserve in there. Things need to be bigger. And if we think of that in a normal life-to-life context, of course that's the reality, isn't it? Because if the teacher wrote on the blackboard at threshold, if what you could just see, if all our vision was 6/6 vision on the blackboard, nobody would ever survive school. You'd never be able to sustain it, would you? So it's that idea of being pushed to the limit and sustain vision. And we can bring that idea of how to assess vision and how to look at it more holistically in the clinic that we can measure contrast as well. So I've got a chart up here which is showing that the letters aren't just making a certain angle, but they're also, these make a certain angle, but they all stay the same. So they're all the same size, but they're faded. And when they fade, we again test you to threshold. Where's the absolute limit of where you can see? And what does that mean for you in real life? So if you can see the really black ones at the top, which are about 90%, even then you wouldn't really be able to sustain vision, because we know that we need to have a really good reserve. So if you're just trying to spot something, we need 3-to-1. If you want to read fluently, we need a 10-to-1 reserve. So you need lots of contrast reserve in order to get by. So often when I'm seeing people in low vision, it's not the detail that's the problem. It's the fact that they can't see faded things. And I think your chairman was saying to me, we were moaning about the steps here. Somebody's very carefully put something on to show there's a step, but they've put yellow onto brown. And so the contrast isn't good. So on that note, I'm going to get you to do something for me. So just in case all of you are getting really fed up and thinking, oh, this is very patronising, this is, really annoying, I want you to get really annoyed with your plastic bag. So what I want you to do is I want you to take your sweets out of your plastic bag, and I want you to crunch it up. You can crunch it up as crossly as you like. Sort of think of the most irritating, uncomfortable contact lens you've ever worn and take it out on the plastic bag. Give it a good scrunch. Yeah. That's it. And then when you've done that, if you have a look at the screen, and if you were able to spot my son in the grey tracksuit, then have a look and see which one I'm most able to lose. So when you've got your scrunched up bag, so to have a practical check. Now, Martin, you need to scrunch up a bit more. Yeah. So I hope you can get the idea that contrast has a great practical approach. I didn't particularly want to lose my son in this museum, but it was so apparent when he sat on the tractor, he just merged into the background. So hopefully most of you can see that the boy in the red's easier to see. Is everybody agreeing with me? Yeah. Now the interesting thing about the Fox's Glacier mints is if you want to do, you can try the same looking through the clear mint. The only problem is it doesn't work so well at a long distance, but when you get home and you've got a clean plate with something on, put your Fox's Glacier mint that's clear on top of it, and you'll see that you can see what's underneath, but you won't be able to see through the cloudy one, which is the coloured one, so you can try that one at home. So I've gone a little bit into getting the detail and being able to record the detail, but most people have an understanding in a low vision clinic that we're going to be at least trying to look at things like magnification, because we're going to be trying to make things easier to see. The trouble with working with someone like yourselves is that making things bigger doesn't necessarily make them clearer. It gives us more chance to get a bigger angle at the back of the eye. It gives us more chance for us to resolve that detail, but it doesn't necessarily bring in the clarity. So we've got to work with that magnification to see if it's going to work. So what we're aiming for in working out how much we need to magnify things is to think about the task size, think about how small somebody might need to see something. So is it the label? Is it the computer screen? Is it the television subtitles? And then work out what somebody actually can see. And then the difference in the two should give us an estimate of how much magnification we need to try. We're not sure whether that's going to work. And the problem with magnification and the technical side of it in terms of labelling magnification is that all magnifiers are based on some maths that's based on using a device at a set distance, because we have to have a basis for the sums. And so it's not always the case that a magnifier that says it's 3 is actually making things 3 times bigger in the context you're using it. And sometimes the 3 times magnification might actually, in the context you're using it, be giving you more magnification than a 4 times. So that's confusing as it is. And that's unfortunately why you sometimes have to sort of trust, as Wahida said, you have to have confidence in the practitioner who sort of understands this or tries to understand it. But there are some easy things that it's really helpful to understand magnification and to actually perhaps be able to explain to your family why things help. So sometimes it's easier just to get things nearer. In my family, my son has a mild vision impairment, so he's always determined to be the one who's sitting right in front of the television screen, about 50 centimetres away, even though he doesn't need to be. But it's just because that gives that easier magnification. It's nearer, so it's easy to get nearer. We can make things bigger, and that's something we see in day-to-day life. So we can see large print, we can see big button phones. We can use lenses. So if we can't magnify through simply getting things near and using a lens to look nearer, we can use telescopes and other lenses. So for those of you who've looked at arm's length magnification, something like a telescope or other lenses can help. And we can project things. So I don't know if any of you have come across these electronic devices like electronic viewers, or used to be called CCTVs. They often use projection systems. And I'm going to briefly touch on those. But what is the business then? What's the hardware or the stuff that we need in low vision? And these are all devices, so they're all sort of technical things that are helping give that magnification. I'm just going to whiz through some of the things that you might be able to see in a clinic, and just to give you some idea of some of the wealth of things that can be open to you. I was teaching teachers last week, and I just took along a selection of devices that we were looking at certain scenarios with children, and lots of teachers said to me, "Oh, I've never seen all this thing. I've never seen all this equipment." And I was quite horrified, because the basic equipment that we have in a local hospital, in my experience, is there are services that have much more equipment than we have. So it's always sort of worth trying to explore with your departments or with your supplier, the wealth of the equipment that they do have. And that's why I'm trying to give you a little bit of an insight. So we've got optical equipment, there's electronic equipment, non-optical equipment, and I'll touch on that just very briefly. I don't want people to think that I'm just, because I'm an optometrist and because I'm dealing with lenses, that I forget about the high-tech toolbox. And I think currently that's really, really crucial that we think about this. So there's a number of electronic reading devices that I've touched on. There's a number of things that are coming into play now where we can use scanning technology to read back things, to talk about things, and just many simple apps on your mobile phone, magnification apps, lots of things like that can be used. So I think high tech is really the way to go. And with lots of youngsters now, you'll see them taking pictures of things, scanning and making it bigger. So optical magnifiers have their place, but we need to not forget about the electronic ones. And some of these sort of magnifiers do look quite archaic. They do look a bit old-fashioned. But interestingly, we did some research with Thomas Pocklington Trust looking at how young people felt about magnifiers. And what was interesting, in a very tech-savvy age, many of the young people actually felt that there was a reason to have an optical magnifier, that they understood that they couldn't always manage their mobile phone with the glare. It wasn't always convenient just to whip a mobile phone out. Sometimes it was better just to have a handheld magnifier. And so these are the sort of basic magnifiers that we could supply, just a basic lens that focuses, enables you to look a bit closer and enables things to look bigger. And unfortunately, though, we're limited to the optics. So the bigger the lens, the weaker the power. So Wahid will probably smile. I know Martin will smile. We'd probably be millionaires if we could come up with a page size ×4 magnifier, because it just isn't optically possible. And trying to help people understand that if they go out and purchase a big lens, they're not necessarily going to get the same sort of magnification they would with a smaller lens. Very often, and in your circumstances, it may or may not help to add light. So sometimes adding light, if it's not good directional light, can actually give more photosensitivity or more glare. But light, because it's very directional in these magnifiers, can actually help when sometimes it doesn't help more generally. So there are a number of magnifiers with lights that we can supply. We can make life easier by actually providing that sort of lens on a stand where the focus has already been self-designed. And for children and young people, that can be helpful in just sort of fixing the focus. The big advantage of children and young people is that they've got quite strong focusing muscles, so it's not quite as important to get reading glasses and get things right there. But they can be very helpful to use those sorts of magnifiers that just stand away from the page. I've mentioned that children and young people find them useful, often because they've got strong focusing muscles, but sometimes you'll find that magnifiers are being set up so that their images are sort of right for somebody looking in the distance, and that can sometimes mean that children reject them because they can't quite focus with it, they can't quite get it right. Often I see my patients come back and they've got a stand magnifier that they're using as a hand magnifier. So they're actually lifting the stand magnifier off the page and using it like a hand magnifier. And it's possible that somebody who saw them just hadn't thought about whether they got the right reading glasses or not. So it's really important to think about it as a whole and get those magnifiers thought about in the context of how you're using it and your vision. And I mentioned that anything past arm's length, you're going to need a set of lenses. You're going to need something like a binocular or a telescope or monocular. And we've got some very sort of cosmetically beautiful things, but this is not one of them, the one at the top. So this is a TV pair of spectacles. which sort of looks a little bit odd because we've got double lenses there. I've had at least 2 patients that I can recall that came back to me and said, I just can't wear this. My grandchildren just are teasing me, or I just don't feel comfortable wearing it in the family home. So I think it is important we think about the dynamics and the emotional side of that as well, the appearance of these things and how to use them. And one of the important things for me is enabling people to use them efficiently and quickly. And that's where we'd bring in the HAB or the rehabilitation techniques to enable people to make the best use of their vision. And on that, I think it's really crucial that we do just move away from the stuff and try and think a bit more holistically. Think about, it's not just a piece of equipment. How are we going to take this equipment, enlarge things, make things accessible? How are we going to make the most effective use of it? And this is where, again, I can wake you up because you can all do your sums. This statement was written 5 years after I was born, so then you can all tell me my age in a few minutes' time. So this was written in 1970, 5 years after I was born. So I think it's a really sad indictment for some of the services that I still see in the UK, because it's basically saying to make the most effective use of vision aids, usually there's a need for a special training aid. And most of us can put our hands up and say most of the services in the UK don't take that into account. Many services still just supply the equipment in a very cost-effective way because they never actually know whether that equipment's working or not. They don't help those people access that sort of training and use of equipment. So that's something I've been working hard over my career to change. So what could that sort of training do for yourselves? Where would that sort of holistic approach enable somebody to make the most of their vision and make the most of the equipment? Well, when we're working with somebody in equipment, we're sort of looking at things like, can somebody move around their peripheral vision? Can they scan and search with their vision? If they've got a high drops or some corneal opacity, does that mean that they have to change how they're sitting? Is there an ergonomic feature to this and holding something close to? Sometimes it's just a question of repetitive skills training, a bit like Wahida said with the contact lenses, just going over and over and over something, how to hold a magnifier, how to focus it, how to get the right point in your vision. Sometimes it's just about some special techniques. So we've got something called steady eye strategy, where we're actually getting a person to hold a magnifier steady and move the paperwork underneath. All sounds very easy when I'm saying it very flippantly, doesn't it? But they're things that need a lot of input and enabling people to have time to explore these things and explore the equipment. Because the goal for me is about enabling that person to get the best out of their eyesight and the best out of their equipment. And I think that's really, really important. But the reality is that a number of you may not have ever been offered this. You may not have perceived it was something that could help. And so I think it's really important that we serve you better and that you get a chance to access these things. So I think for you to get that better service, to access things, my first suggestion is that you start where you're seeing somebody clinically, whether it's your optometrist, your dispensing optician, your orthoptic service. Most services are still linked to NHS clinics. Some are provided in community optometry practices. So in Wales, all the opticians, or most of the opticians, are trained and accredited in low vision, and low vision services are offered in practice, as is the case in many areas in Scotland. There are local voluntary societies like Focus Birmingham that have low vision services, and low vision services aren't just provided by optometrists, they're provided by dispensing opticians and orthoptists. So a good starting point is to ask in your contact lens clinic just to say, you know, I'd really like to be able to read with my contact lenses this, or I'm having difficulty cooking when I get home. I don't want to have to watch television through a pinhole. Can I be referred to a low vision service? Or could you recommend one? And if you're really stuck, then RNIB have a sightline directory. If you put in your town or your city, you can come up with local services and actually see which one would be near to you and might offer you a service. And in terms of the wider issues, in terms of what you can go away from today and how we can affect change together, how we can work with yourselves as the Keratoconus group to work through Vision UK, I think it's really important that we work with those mechanisms that are trying to strategically change things, that are trying to say we need to transform services to make sure they're meeting the needs of people that have sight problems or sight loss. So local eye health networks are often looking at the pathways. So Amit talked this morning about the pathway into Keratoconus and streamlining it and make sure that people weren't waiting and people weren't losing sight. And we're looking at that at a national level through Vision UK in terms of some of the things a particular council for eye health looking at. That taps down to local eye health networks, and you should be able to perhaps find out who your local eye health network is and try and say how important it is to get services right. Thomas Pocklington Trust, one of the organisations also part of this, is currently looking at sight loss councils. People with sight loss having a collective voice and being able to impact upon local service provision. So if you Google sight loss councils and Thomas Pocklington Trust, you might be able to get involved and might be able to advocate for these services. And many of the local voluntary organisations are now working on sector-wide partnerships to try and bring themselves together around all these issues. So if you have a look at the visionary site, for instance, you may be able to see if anybody's working on anything locally. So I think I've overrun. I'd already apologised to Michelle. As I'm always late for clinic, and I'm afraid I'm late for Michelle, so I'll be very happy to take any questions probably at the end after the other speakers. But I'd be absolutely delighted if I get loads of emails about this today. And if anybody does want to email me, if you just look up Vision UK, all the staff members are on there. But my email address is mary.bairstow@visionuk.org.uk. But I'll pass over to Michelle.
Thank you very much, Mary.